Hi there, it's Grace Krivinger. Welcome back to the Art of What's Next podcast. And I think you're going to love today's episode with the brilliant and dynamic Radha Agrawal. Radha is a true community force. She is the co-founder, CEO, and chief community architect of Daybreaker, the early morning sober dance party that currently holds events in 33 cities and 7 continents, with a community of 500,000 people showing up to dance. Radha is a successful entrepreneur. She's the co-founder of Thinks and Live It Up. She's an author, she's a speaker, DJ, inventor, and investor. She wrote one of my favorite best-selling books called Belong: Find Your People, Create Community, and Live a More Connected Life. I'm so excited to welcome you into a conversation that I had with Radha at a live Hivery event, where we go deep on the subject of belonging and how community and the feeling of togetherness is vital to our health. But what I thought is really interesting about you and what we believe in so much here is that each of us have this unique mix of experience and knowledge and skills and pain and grief and epiphanies, to use your beautiful word, that lead us to our path. And if you'll just tell us a little bit about what brought you to this place
Totally.
of creating this book.
Yeah, so, the first sentence in my book is, when I turned 30, I realized I didn't belong. And, it's a sentence that takes us a lot of time to come to realize, right? We can be pretty ashamed of this concept of, I don't belong, where are my friends? Oh, I'm fine, I'm totally fine, But we really feel this sense of shame around not belonging, and admitting to myself that, wow, I looked myself in the mirror, I turned 30 years old, and I said, wow, I don't have any friends with whom I feel very inspired by. I spent my 20s trying to be cool, going to sports bars, drinking beer I didn't want to drink, watching football that I didn't care about, and just getting drunk on weekends, just sort of numbing my loneliness in many ways. And that was sort of the beginning of this journey, of this sort of self-discovery. Like, wait a minute, I'm likable, I'm cool, I've got some good things going. Mm-hmm. So how is it that I've spent so much time radiating this version of myself that isn't authentically me?
Right.
So that was sort of the beginning of this journey, and frankly, it wasn't a low point that I hit. I wasn't, it wasn't sort of this negative experience. It was just this aha moment of like, like there was sort of the fire was gone in my eyes a little bit, And so that was the beginning of this sort of journey of self-exploration. And I think so much of what we do in community building, certainly what I see so much of community buildings that exist today, is sort of this reaching out into the world of trying to create community outside. When it really, the Hivery exists and it's all its beauty because you're radiating so authentically that, as the founder of the space. And until we ourselves go inside and take the time to get gooey with ourselves and take time to really connect with who we are, what we value, what we're interested in, what we're good at, we're constantly going to be caring about what other people think. And that's what happened to me. So it's sort of probably a story that we've all heard in our own lives at different points in our lives. For me, it turned 30. And I think, we have 7 or 8 inflection points in our life, from when we go to college for the first time, move to a new city for the first time, get married, have a kid, get divorced, God forbid, retire, move to, so there's so many moments in life where you're starting all over. Right. And at each point it gets more difficult. So right. The genesis of the book was really wanting to give people, as I learned the answers, as I built my own community, as I went from feeling a sense of sort of I don't belong to cultivating this incredible community that gave me wings personally initially, and then which led to Daybreaker, now professionally, though I say that with heavy quotes because it's not really a profession. It's so much fun.
It's a joy.
It's such a joy. That I wanted to share all of our trade secrets, everything we've ever learned at Daybreaker, how we built a community of 500,000 people in 23 cities around the world. I want to put into the pages because I get asked all the time, how did you do this? How do I do this? How do I build community for my business or my personal life or my family? And one coffee that I would take, 1 hour-long coffee that I would have was never enough. Right. So I spent 2 years putting it all down on paper.
It's so beautiful. And
So,
what I love about Radha, what Radha did in the book is that she really marries inspiration with what she said, like that it's actually the practical application of how she built this community. Even down to, there was something that really resonated with me, and I'll let you talk a little bit more about the crawl acronym.
sure,
Yes,
yeah, please.
But the A in the crawl acronym, I'm going to skip ahead for 1 second because she talks about aesthetics and how there's like a contagiousness in our energy that we're drawn, and it reminded me so much of the Hivery, because it's not about beauty for beauty's sake. It's not beauty at like a shallow level. It's beauty for resonance and intention and the elevation of ideas. So there was so much in there that I really appreciated. Will you tell him a little bit about? I was gonna save the acronym for a couple questions, but I'm really excited when you meet someone again that brings inspiration together with the practical. Then it says we can go forth and that inspiration can be a contagious energy. So
the crawl method was really sort of a distilling of 5 years of learnings. I built community with our team of 40 community catalysts around the world, and I learned so much across the 5 years of how do we do this? How do we build community? What are some of the sort of the trending kind of topics across all of our cities? And whether you're in Buenos Aires or Paris or New York or London, or Austin, Texas, the thread of community building is all the same. Right. So I distilled that down into this method I call the crawl method. So the crawl method, I call it the crawl method because it takes time. There's no sort of shortcut button in building community. So many marketers try to throw things on social media or try to buy influencers and buy numbers, but that's not how you build a sustained community. All that does is creates sort of a dependence. You have to continuously feed the vein, right? Of having to continuously pay these influencers to post for you, which is already inauthentic. So it takes time. So you have to crawl. You can't run. And that's why you have to first ask yourself, and that's sort of the W and the L from kind of in the crawl method. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And why? I mean, for you, it's so clear. It's so in your DNA. But so the crawl is an acronym for defining your constraints, right? Defining your core values, defining your core communities. So there's 3 C's in the crawl. So core community, constraints, and core values. And then the R, and then I'll go through what each of them mean. The R is defining your rituals, which is so critical in creating community. The A is defining your aesthetics, which is so defined here as well, as a good example. The W is defining your why, and sort of 5 questions around the why. And then the L is defining your language, which is honestly one of the most sort of critical parts of community building that we often overlook in our attempt to be professional, right? So what language does the Hivery have to all your community members, right? What language and tone do you take? And like those are the kinds of things that we think about ad nauseum at Daybreaker HQ. So the C is defining your constraints, core values, and core community. The constraints are, at Daybreaker, what are they? The constraints are, it's the morning, right? So if you're not a morning person, you might not want to come to Daybreaker. So you're filtering your community. The constraints is that it's sober. So if you need to be sort of sauced up to have a good time, you might not sort of enjoy Daybreaker initially until we show you that it's way better. And then the constraint is that it's music that is high vibration. It's deep house, soul house, funk house, disco house style music versus dubstep, minimal tech house, rap, sort of darker, angrier music. So if you're not into that type of music, you might not want to come. So we have very clear constraints, which makes it easy for community members to say, hey, I want to be part of this. This is my vibes. I want to come here. Another very kind of silly example is like Louis Vuitton handbags. Like if you're going to buy a Louis Vuitton handbag, the constraint is that you're into heritage, right? And you're into, or if you can afford it. So it's cost. And the style of bag is a constraint for the consumer. So thinking about in your community, what are the constraints in yours is actually going to help you really create some wonderful guardrails for how you actually then sort of filter in your community members and speak to them as well. And then the second C is defining your core values. At Daybreaker, our core values are the lens through which we look at every single partnership, every single relationship, every single brand that we invite into the space. We look through the lens of our 5 core values, and they are wellness, right? Camaraderie, self-expression, mindfulness, and mischief. Mischief being my favorite. And it's so important that we define them. And even before we launched our very first Daybreaker, it was just meant to be a social experiment, an art project. The very first one we did on December 10th of 2013, first snowfall in New York City. So people should have hit the snooze button and not shown up. But I spent the first 6 years before, when I turned 30 to 36, before I launched Daybreaker, 6 years cultivating my personal community, throwing parties for fun at my house, always being the sort of the Grand Central Station for our friend groups. Because that's what I said, I'm going to be very intentional. I went out, built my community by doing that, by participating, by giving, by showing up. And then they showed up for me, So when the experiment launched in 2013, 180 friends showed up, and friends of friends, and it was just this wonderful thing. Again, they any sort of normal person would have been like, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna roll over and snuggle into my bed. But that's the cornerstone of belonging too, is showing up.
Yeah.
So define your core values, and then we did that before, and then define your core community. So those 180 friends that showed up to the very first one, they were the ones that we handpicked them. My partner and I, my co-founder and I, we sat down weeks before the event, before we did the first invitation, and we said, who's going to be an FYF? I don't know if you read my book. An FYF is a fuck yeah friend. Someone's going to be like, fuck yeah, I'm going to try that. Sure. I'll definitely wake up at 6 a.m. and dance at sober at sunrise. Weird, but cool. I'll try it. And so we handpicked 300 people. 300 names, put on an Excel spreadsheet, and we wrote down fun, cool, yeah, person who says yes all the time. We literally wrote down, and we would debate, and we would say, no, this person's kind of a negative Nancy, forget it, that person, so we actually had, you have to define the energetic mix when you first launch a community. It's so critical. So your core community defines the beginning of that circle. You can't just invite anybody willy-nilly and put an ad on whatever and hope just anybody will show up. You have to be very thoughtful and handpick each and every person who comes, because that will create the centrifuge, the initial beginning energetic centrifuge of what will then come. And everybody felt that. They came to the first one and everybody felt that, and we felt that. We cried on the dance floor. We let it all go, and that core community was so critical, so integral in launching the Daybreaker community across the world. And had it not been for them, we wouldn't be here today. So that's the C in crawl.
It's beautiful. And the part about core values really stopped me in my tracks, because we have been very intentional here. For those of you that are familiar with the Hivery, our core values are kindness, creativity, and community. We always start with kindness. You'll never hear me say it in another order. Kindness is always number one. So then people will ask me, where are the jerks? Why aren't there jerks here? Well, let me tell you.
Totally.
Because it works. So people talk fluffy talk about core values, and then there's
walk the walk. Yeah.
Walking the walk, which is putting your core values in every morsel of your endeavor, your creation, your organization, whatever that is. And so when I read that in the book, it reminds me of how it works.
And it has to be authentic. Otherwise,
Yes.
It has to be also sort of led by the leadership. If it's not led by the leadership, then the trickle down happens, right?
Exactly.
And so the R in crawl is defining your rituals. And at Daybreaker, we really sat down and thought, okay, what is the arc of the story, of the experience, right? We're now experienced designers. We're bringing people into a room, into a space. Let's just not throw things on the wall and see what happens, or just put drinks on the table and hope that people, have a good time. Let's really build a story arc and define a story for each and every person who walks into the space, and let that story be the same story. So when they walk away, they're like, oh my God, remember that thing that happened? They can all sort of commiserate with one another about how they had this shared moment. So for us, the ritual is that when you walk in the door, Daybreaker, no matter what, we replaced the bouncer with a hugging committee. Um, so no matter what at Daybreaker, you go from kind of a jerk who's like looking you up and down and whatever, which I find to be so bizarre. Why are there bouncers anyway? It's bizarre. Anyway, so but replace that with a hugging committee, and so obviously consensual if you want one. You don't have to. One. I have to give that disclaimer. But but we have a hugging committee that hugs you as soon as you walk in. So I know, and actually, oftentimes now I'm the hugger. I've made myself redundant in most other positions, so I'm just kind of like, I'll do the hugging. And actually, it's my favorite role. But I've hugged now probably, I don't know, 10,000 people in 5 years, probably 300-400 people per event. And I'm just there and I'm hugging, and people go from, I mean, this little shoulder right here has been cried on so many times, I've had looks go from sort of like confusion of like, what am I doing here, to like, whoa, I really needed that hug, thank you, to notes that I've gotten that have been written to me unsolicited from community members sharing how that hug, they haven't been hugged in weeks, how that hug meant so much to them, how they just went through something. And so just something as simple as hugs are so critical. I'll get into that when I talk about dose, but we are so physically starved for affection in this country. We turn to pornography. We're the number one Americans are the number one viewers of pornography in the world, but we are the most physically starved. So Americans touch each other upwards of once in a conversation versus Puerto Ricans who touch each other upwards of 120, 130 times in a conversation. They're always like, you know what I mean? I love that. And so, like, let's just touch each other.
I just found out I'm Puerto Rican. I think I just yes.
Let's just like learn to touch each other more in a non-creepy way.
Love that.
But so you get you get the hug, at the door. You walk into space, there's everybody, all of our team, just like here, everyone's trained to be just deeply inclusive, welcoming. One of the things I hear the most at Daybreaker is that, when someone just like bumps into you, no one's like, everyone's like, oh my God, are you okay? There's just like wonderful, like, can I hug you? Can I kiss it better? And I've heard that now so many times across the world of just people being so taken aback about how warm everybody is. And then we have the ritual of, we have a jumping group hug at the end. So imagine like 500 people kind of coming together in this one amoeba, and everyone's jumping and saying yes and singing and dancing, and it's this wonderful, connected, I cry every time moment. And then we end with this incredible, so it's a 2-hour dance party, 1-hour yoga, and then it ends with this what we call an intention ceremony, where every single person gets an intention card, and we read poems out loud together as a community, as one unit. So you went from just giving so much energy on the dance floor, having like fire spinners and aerialists and break dancers and horn sections and all kinds of stuff, eye candy, and just opening you up to then ground into this moment of connection to yourself and to this idea that we're greater than our individual. And here we are collectively hearing our voices as a whole. So we read poems by Dr. Seuss or by Dr. Martin Luther King, or depending on what the theme is of the month, we really take into account a beautiful moment. And that ritual is something that brings people back each and every time. So ritual is so critical at Daybreaker. It's so critical to create sustaining community. It's what churches, it's what football team chants are. It's the birthday song. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's all ritual, right? And then the A in crawl is aesthetics. Of course, we talked about that. We, in community building, can be kind of averse to branding and advertising and making things look pretty because it might seem inauthentic. But it's so critical that today, especially with swiped filters and everything that exists in the world, that we take the time to think about what does our brand logo look like. It's so clean and beautiful, the Hivery.
Thank you.
Daybreaker, I'm so proud of our logo. What are our font colors? What are our font families? What are our colors? What is our aesthetic look like? How can we actually create something that can rival the biggest brands in the world? That people can say, I want to be a part of that. That's cool, right? And that takes deep intention, and it might not be your forte, but that's about bringing someone in. We bring in teams of designers, branding agencies, whatever, to support I do a lot of that myself in-house, but that's my background. But if that's not your forte, recognize that and bring somebody in who is. There's so many freelancers who have a beautiful eye. And so that the aesthetic piece is critical in sustaining your community. and inspiring community to join in the first place. The W in crawl is defining it's actually really 5 questions. The first is, why are you the person to lead this community, right? Why are you lead this community? Because it takes so much effort. It takes so much love and effort and courage and commitment and showing up over and over again for your community. So why are you the person to show up for your community each and every day? The second question is, why is this community financially viable? I think so often community builders are very much also about like, I don't want to talk about money, la la la, you know, and financial viability is actually very critical in sustaining community. Like you're buying memberships, you're selling tickets, like you're getting sponsors to support the growth of the movement, and we can't reject that anymore. So how and why is your community viable financially, and why are you the person to really tell that story of that financial viability? And it takes also a deep looking yourself in the mirror, being like, maybe numbers isn't my thing, but let me bring someone else in who can really help me think that through. And again, we can't do it all ourselves. I know we're superhero women. We make babies, we build business, we do all of it. But some of us are better at building community. Some of us are better at the finance side. So let's really inspire and that conversation with each other and ask ourselves, how is this thing going to be financially viable? How can we scale this thing if you want to? There's a bunch of other why questions, W questions in the book as well. And then finally, the last one is language, the L, which I think is probably one of the most important cornerstones of community building, which is, how are you talking to your community? I go on so many websites and it's like, very professional, very serious, take me seriously, right? And I think it's like, if you really want to build a community, it has to be from the heart. It has to be sort of a voice that people can then say, oh, that's so Daybreaker. Oh my God, that's so Hivery. That this is such a distinct voice that I can really sink my teeth into. It's why she wanted to eat the book, which makes me really. But yeah, it's why, Daybreaker, I always say that our style is intellectual, silly emojis. And so we have all kinds of intellectual facts and figures, science-based sort of storytelling around the dose, like releasing the science of dance, what it does for you, how it releases your neural creative pathway, how it sort of, there's so much stuff that goes behind sort of dancing. That's not just about come to my party, right? So we tell that in a scientific way so that you're learning, oh wow, maybe I was shy before to dance. I told myself and everyone around me I wasn't a dancer. But if science says that I can be more successful if I danced, science says that I can actually sort of unlock these neural creative pathways that I've never realized can be unlocked through dance and self-expression, maybe I could give it a shot, So perhaps there's multiple ways that you're entering into these worlds, but language is so critical in defining that. And I think we do that really well. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. I just couldn't help but skip ahead to this. There's so much thoughtfulness and heart and passion that Radha has put into what she's built, and then to be able to convey it in a way that we can consume and then apply to the work we're doing, I think is really extraordinary. And I do think it's really rare, because so often we get these like hits of inspiration that don't have okay, that's really inspiring and aspirational, but now what do I do with it? And I feel like that's what you did.
Thank you.
Beautifully. I'm really, one of the things that she just alluded to that I think is so fascinating, and you brought it up with dance, but really in terms of being human, we talk so often about wellness and longevity and vitality, and we do all these things to create a sense of wellness. But what I thought was fascinating too is just the health behind feeling like you belong and feeling like you're a part of something, and what that does to our happiness, our state of being, and really our health.
So let's talk about the opposite first. So the opposite is, Harvard came out with a study that shared that when you don't feel connected, when you lack connection, it is as harmful to your physical health as being an alcoholic, and twice as harmful as obesity. So when you don't take the time to make friends and find that sense of, I'm home, you're physically sick. And, my dear friend, Dr. Hyman, who wrote a beautiful quote in my book, and he's written 11 New York Times bestselling books, his latest book talks about how if you don't have a community, you cannot be healthy. That community is so tied to our health and wellness. And until we recognize the relationship between the two, we're going on divergent paths. And so it's not only for your mental health, your physical health as well.
Right.
When you don't belong, when someone rejects you, when you feel the sense of being left out, actually, it's as painful as having a broken arm. It can be as painful psychologically as having a broken arm physically. So there's so many sort of psychosomatic, physical, emotional things that happen when you don't have community that we don't realize. It's sort of this whirring undercurrent that continues to sort of bubble under until we recognize that, wait a minute, all of life's problems, every, sort of gun violence, suicide, every depression, anxiety, they're all in these crazy epidemics, or an opioid epidemic, drug epidemic, cocaine. It ladders down to one single idea, which I don't belong. And therefore I need to hide with violence. I need to hide with anger and hate.
Well, I just think what's interesting and what I have learned, Hivery, and what I learned again while I was reading your book is how unaware we are when we're experiencing that emotion. And I'll give you one example that I've seen here. When we do tours at the Hivery, and many of you have come to the tour and you probably said the very thing that I'm about to quote, which when people come, they say, one of the things they say about why they came is because they need to get away from their laundry. And it always comes back to the laundry. It's like, well, I've got this laundry looking at me. Because I think in some ways we are unaware or possibly afraid to say, I'm lonely. I'm in my home office and I'm alone and no one is responding or expressing with me, and that feels awful. But instead we say, I got to get away from the laundry. So it's really made me aware of how unaware we are when that sense of belonging is lacking and how much we need it.
Totally. And I think what you're creating here is this idea that you can be building your own freelance world, freelance career, but together. And I think so much of the beauty of freelance, you forget the loneliness that's sort of attached to it.
But what I think is interesting, and I can imagine happens in any community that feels supported, is it's okay to not know what to do next. I'm sure, I used to be a dancer, and you put a trained dancer on a dance floor and we're like, no, I need choreography. I can't just, so it takes a minute to figure out what we're doing. So I love this idea of being able to be free, not knowing.
That's it.
How it's all
That's it. It's the mystery. So I always say also that to sustain community, it's sort of the intersection of mystery and safety, right? So, but the mystery, the Beatles were so cool because we didn't know on Instagram where they were,
Right.
And so the mystery at Daybreaker is that you never know where we're going to be next. We're always roving. We're constantly shifting from museums to gardens to outdoor rooftops to all theme parks, whatever. And the mystery of where are they going to be next, but the safety of knowing it's going to be a beautifully produced event. There's going to be great people there, great music that I can count on. It's going to be joyful people that's inclusive, an inclusive environment. But the mystery of who's going to DJ, what's the theme, where's it going to be, what's the partner. So that is actually the cornerstone of how you actually sustain your community over time. If it becomes too safe, no one's want to go. If it's too mysterious, there's no safety, then you lose sort of the loyalty. I mean, you need to be sort of really threading the line between mystery and safety.
I love that. Yeah. Speaking of mystery, what has surprised you in this process? And I'm going to let you direct the question, because on the one hand, what I'm really proud of in having you here is that you embody this ability to pivot and to make something new, change in another direction, create something that the world had never seen anything like this before. And then she went and wrote the playbook on how to do it. So there's there's an element of pivoting and change and transformation. But what surprised you in that journey, either in writing the book or in Daybreaker?
I mean, writing the book was one of the most challenging things I've ever taken on in my entire life. The whiplash of going from hustle bustle of Daybreaker office to sort of pin drop silence was just like a deep whiplash every night for 2 years. But I think, more than anything, it was when I wrote the book, I was really trying to channel 8 or 9 archetypes. Like, what would a high school kid sort of, if they came to the book, what would they experience from this? If I was a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and I read the book, what can I get out of this? I really want, what if I was a divorced housewife and I was like, where are my people at? I gave everything to my man and I don't know where to go, how would that person react if there's a little bit of maybe negativity coming into the book,
Right.
So it was really sort of threading the needle between trying to be strategically sort of open enough so that anybody who picked up the book gets something out of it, but specific enough where if you want to build a specific community, here are all the exact tools to do it. So that was the biggest challenge in writing this book was wanting to because belonging is such a universal topic. Whether you're 5 or whether you're 75, we all want to belong. And so this book is for everybody, for every point in your life. And I think that was the biggest challenge, is trying to sort of distill a big topic down to something that everybody gets something away from. And I think I'm really proud of how it came out. But that's really what I wanted to do in this book, was give a face to so many of our feelings. So like we get quick examples. I talk about the mean girls of our mind. We all have these we all live in this cafeteria of our minds, right? And there's like this, we have this tray and we're in the cafeteria of our minds every day, every moment. And we decided where are we going to sit? Are we going to sit with the mean girls or are we going to walk? And the mean girls are comparison, judgment, and perfectionism. Right, they're BFFs. Talk about that in my book. And it's like, and tell me that's not applicable for every age, right? Like, Mean Girls are comparison, perfectionism, and judgment, and you have a choice, and they're never going away. They're always going to be sitting at their Mean Girls table with their pink jackets, but or you can walk past them with your tray and acknowledge and be like, I see you, but I'm not going to sit with you. And then you go and walk past them and sit with the soul sisters instead. And the soul sisters, or soul brothers, for the brothers in the house.
Yes.
Are the opposite of comparison is inspiration, right? Instead of comparing yourself on your social media feeds or comparing yourself, she's doing more than I am, she's so much, she whatever, blah, blah, blah. Instead of comparing yourself, be inspired by that person. What a beautiful, quick mindset shift, right? Instead of judging yourself, be curious about that judgment. Get curious. Why am I judging myself? Why am I judging that person? Usually it's a mirror for you. So judgment becomes curiosity. The soul sister is curiosity. The mean girl is judgment. And then perfectionism becomes gratitude. Instead of nitpicking what's going wrong, this sucks and I'm too fat, whatever. It's I'm so grateful that my sheets are the thread count on these sheets. So great. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Right? And I'm so grateful I get to drink clean water when 500 million people or whatever on the planet don't get that. Mm-hmm. So it's just having this moment of switching our perfectionism to gratitude. And these are just some simple, what I talk about. The first half of my book is going in. First you have to go inside and clean up your own shit before you go out and radiate the authentic version of yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's really so much of half the book is who are you? How are you showing up when you walk into a space? And everyone here, I feel like, is just so joyful and beautiful. But there's some, of course, we're always working on ourselves every day. But how do you walk into a space? So for me, I use a doorway. I talk about that in my book as well, as a threshold. A doorway is always my trick. Before I go into Daybreaker office every morning, I stop at the door. I hold the handle. I take 3 deep breaths, and I'm like, how am I going to show up for my team today? Am I going to show up with judgment, frustration, anger, whatever, or am I going to be cool, calm, and collected? At least I'll try, and I open the door and I walk in and it's my day started. And if I'm having tough conversation with someone, I use a doorway again as a way to say, hey, give me a second. I just need to take a walk. And then I come back in and the doorway again is my reset button. And so there's so many sort of thresholds in the physical world that we can use as wonderful guideposts for resetting and refreshing our energy, to recognize the mean girls, soul sisters of our minds. So I talk about all that in my book.
Please join me in thanking Radha for being with us.
Thank you.
Bravo. I hope you found this episode helpful, idea-provoking, and inspiring, especially if you're in the midst of creating or clarifying your next chapter. I can't even put into words how much I appreciate you, your vulnerability, your stories of creating a life and meaningful work amidst adversity, grief, ever-changing and challenging times, and of course, life's peaks and uncertain valleys. You are seekers, wisdom sharers, and artists of life, and together we can build meaningful next chapters that feel aligned with who we really are, what we're put on this earth to do, and how we can make a difference one human being at a time. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And I would love it if you could leave a review for The Art of What's Next. If you know someone who wants to create a new chapter or who would appreciate this episode, please share it with them. You can text it to them or email them the link or post about the show on your Instagram. If you want more help in creating your own meaningful next chapter, join the Hivery newsletter to get inspiration, stories, and resources to help you create your next chapter like an artist. Sign up at thehivery.com/podcast or at the link in the show notes.